The cheery old Act of Union. I always imagine that's how the Queen describes having sex. Do you know what I mean? Like, one doesn't engage in intercourse. That is merely an act of union. Prince Philip, of course, being made to play the role of Scotland in their Act of Union, whereby he's just made to lie there and pretend that he's enjoying it while he's getting royally fucked off of the... Too far, right? Too far. Fair enough. Well, anyway, the Act of Union that I'm here to talk to you about is one far more horrific than picturing a couple of nonagerians going at it corgi style. It is the Act of Union between the Scottish and English Parliaments in 1707, whereby the Parliament here in Parliament Square in Edinburgh was dissolved into the Parliament of Westminster in London, and the modestly named state of Great Britain was created. Now, some background to the Act itself. The royal family at that time was facing a succession crisis. Charles II, he had died in 1685, having fathered 14 illegitimate children. He's known as the Jolly Monarch in England and the Lee Griffiths King here in Scotland. Now, that's a lot of kids to take to Pizza Express, admittedly, but none of them would go on to be king. So on Charles's death, the crown passed to his brother James, which was an issue because James was a Catholic. And the only thing that English people fear more than a penalty shootout, because they're not very good at them, is a Catholic monarch. So they decided to offer the crown to James's Protestant daughter Mary, which, you know, would have made Christmas round their house pretty awkward. Now, Mary refuses to rule unless she can do so alongside her husband William, but when Mary dies in 1692 without an heir, it means that on William's death, the crown will then pass to Mary's sister Anne. But when Anne's only surviving heir dies in the year 1700, it means that on her death there's no direct heir or direct Protestant heir to the throne. And so they decide to offer the crown to Sophia, the Electress of Hanover, who was the granddaughter of James VI. Now, Sophia was a 7-year-old German woman, so essentially they were actually offer it to her eldest son, George. Now, this is quite a convoluted way of going about things, I know. George was actually there was 57 closer claims to the throne than the guy who eventually got it. Only Hearts would consider 58th choice the right man for the job. And you might be thinking that people would be up in arms about the prospect of an unskilled, non-English speaking migrant coming over here and living off of state handouts. You'd think that people would be up in arms singing, you know, God deport the king, but apparently not. As far as I can tell, English parliamentarians' signing policy at that time was very similar to that of Rangers for a long time, in that any old prick would do as long as they were Protestant. Now, in order for Scotland to go along with this succession, the Scottish Parliament made a couple of demands. First of all, England were no longer allowed to go to war without the consent of the Scottish Parliament. Second of all, the embargo on French goods coming into Scotland was to be lifted, which was great because it meant that we could enjoy brandy with our heroin once again. But most significantly, Scotland didn't have to accept the same monarchy as England. We were free to choose our own king or queen, which I'm right up for, by the way, in an independent Scotland. I mean, all hail Queen Susan Boyle. We can make this happen, people. Now, this was an issue for the English because it meant that Scotland could potentially offer the crown to James, which means that they would be surrounded by Catholic monarchs in Scotland and in France. So in their eyes, the only solution was an incorporating union, whereby the Scottish Parliament was incorporated into the Parliament of Westminster in London. Commissioners were summoned to Whitehall in London and 25 articles were drawn up, all of which had to be debated and passed through here, the Scottish Parliament. The men in charge of making sure that the Act passed were the Duke of Argyll and the Duke of Queensberry, and they did everything in their power by hook or by crook, and by that I mean they handed out a hell of a lot of bribes. They offered bribes of money, positions of peerage, land, titles, half-price sofas at DFS, which at the early 18th century was still actually quite a rarity. Everything in their power. They bribed their way so that the Act eventually passed in January 1707. And on the passing of the Act, the Lord Chancellor touched the Act with the royal sceptre of Scotland, his bobby, right? And uttered their now famous phrase, "Now there's the end of an old song." And regardless of how you feel about the Union, there's no denying that the Act of Union in 1707 was essentially a group of legislators bargaining away the existence of the very country that they were supposed to represent. And that's why it irks when over 300 years later we have a British Prime Minister telling us that he will deny Scottish people their democratic right to a say in the future of their country. But this is what Boris Johnson doesn't understand. This isn't a once-in-a-generation question. Scottish people have continually questioned their place within this political union. Ever since the Union of the Crowns in 1603, Scottish people have wrestled with the idea of what it is to be Scottish within Britain. And whether our national identity has expressed itself through religion, through rebellion, through enlightenment, through war, through soldiering, through politics, through culture, music, language, sport, devolution, it doesn't matter. If Scottish people decide that independence is the next logical step in their journey, then that's for them to decide, and not for some pompous Etonian twat to deny them. And here's what I would say to Boris Johnson, is that yes, 1707 may well have been the end of an old song, but it's a song that we still know the lyrics to here in Scotland. Well, I mean, unless that song is Auld Lang Syne, and to be fair, we're pretty fucked. I mean, nobody knows what comes after Should All Acquaintance Be Forgot. Just don't vote for the Tories, right?